Thank you, Betty. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to begin this afternoon with a bit of history, since Betty says that's what I'm immersed in. But this bit of history will be about the history of the Founder's Address, which I am delivering this afternoon. You know, in the Jewish tradition, the number of life is 18. The Hebrew word for life is chai, which some of you may be familiar with from a toast, l'chaim, which means to life. Now, in Hebrew, every letter of the alphabet has a corresponding number. So if you take the word chai, the numbers of its letters add up to 18. Therefore, 18 is the number of life. Now, as it happens, the Founder's Address was introduced exactly 18 years ago, in 1986. And since this is the 18th anniversary of this lecture, it is perhaps time to think a little about the life of the Founder's Address. The lecture began as one of the ways to celebrate the centennial of the foundation of the Theosophical Society in America. The first of those lectures was delivered by Joy Mills under the title, The History of the American Section, based on her book, 100 Years of Theosophy. And that book was also published as part of that celebration. Now, I remember these details because I was on the National Board of Directors at the time, and we were sitting around the table one day discussing what ways we would use to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the founding of the Society of the American Section. And I suggested starting an annual lecture to do so. Well, we had a lively discussion about that. And I also suggested a name for the lecture. Now, the idea of an annual lecture was accepted enthusiastically. However, some members of the board who had heads that were older and wiser than mine firmly rejected my suggestion for a name for the lecture. And after a lot of discussion, we reached an Anglican compromise. You all know what an Anglican compromise is? An Anglican compromise is something which is so vague that nobody can object to it. Well, actually, there's a lot to be said for Anglican compromises. But in this case, we settled on the title, The Founder's Address. Yet the very generality of the name of this series of talks raises a question. And in fact, that question was what the title was designed to avoid. Just who are the founders of the Theosophical Society? Well, it seems appropriate in this 18th year of the lecture's life to consider that question. And we will begin with the original founders. On November 17th of every year, we celebrate Founders' Day. That day is the anniversary of the first public meeting of the Theosophical Society in New York City, at which Colonel Henry Steele Olcott delivered his inaugural address as the Society's first president. The formation of the Society had actually begun several months earlier, on September 7th, 1875. When 16 or 17 persons at one of Madame Blavatsky's evening parties were intrigued by a presentation made on the topic of the lost canon of proportions of the Egyptians. The next day, as a result of the, I imagine, unexpected enthusiasm engendered by this subject, those persons present agreed to form an organization for, as Colonel Olcott says, the collection and diffusion of knowledge. It would seem then that in those that those dozen or a half persons who resolved to start the society on September 8th, 1875, are its founders. Colonel Alcott, however, calls the persons present at the initial meeting the formers, those who form, the formers of the society. And he reserves the term founders for a smaller number of persons who dedicated themselves to seeing that the society would become established. The Colonel draws this distinction because he says, quote, "The stable foundation was a result of hard work and self-sacrifice of years. And during part of that time, HPB and I worked quite alone in the trenches, laying the strong foundations," end quote. So in a sense, Alcott and Blavatsky are the central founders. The Theosophical Twins, as they were called, worked in tandem, concentrating on different but complementary aspects. They were certainly the twin cornerstones, Alcott of the Theosophical Society and Blavatsky of modern Theosophy. From their early and inchoate days in New York City through their time in India, when both the Society and Theosophy became established in the eyes of the world. Yet even in those early days, Alcott and Blavatsky did not work alone. They were assisted by a variety of other persons and in a variety of ways. William Quan Judge, who was one of the 16 who began to organize the society on that September evening, helped to carry on the work in America after Alcott and Blavatsky had left for India. And he became the first general secretary, or as we call it today, president, of the American section in 1886. He certainly deserves to be remembered and recognized as a founder in a special sense beyond others in that initial group. In addition to the original founders, however, there have been what we might call the continuing founders. Colonel Alcott's observation that a stable foundation is the work of years points to the fact that founding an organization like the Theosophical Society is not a one-time event, but rather a continuing activity. A foundation is not a product, but a process. In the sense of a continuing activity, the Theosophical Society has had other founders, whom we may call continuing founders, each of whom, through hard work and self-sacrifice, has contributed to the foundations on which the society is constantly being built. Although we do not usually consider someone like A.P. Sinnett a founder of the society, his work was in fact foundational. Alfred Percy Sinnett was an Englishman residing in India, where he edited the semi-official government newspaper called The Pioneer. He joined the society in 1879 when Alcott and Blavatsky first arrived in India. And soon after that, he began a correspondence with two of HPB's teachers, from which we have a book called The Mahatma Letters to A.P. Sinnett. At the time that correspondence began, the formulation of Theosophy was inchoate, or indeed one might say chaotic. The first major book on the subject was H.P. Blavatsky's work, Isis Unveiled. And that work was long on marvelous phenomena and short on orderly presentation of principles. In fact, Isis Unveiled became almost proverbial for a work which is disorganized. Isis does, in fact, state or imply the most basic theosophical principles, and if you want to find them, I recommend Michael Gomes's one-volume abridgment rather than the two-volume original. Sinnett was very much interested in phenomena, but he was also interested in the system that lies behind phenomena. His exchange of letters with the Mahatmas became a continuing probing into those principles that lie behind the phenomena of life. The book Sinnett wrote on the basis of those letters, Esoteric Buddhism, in 1883, was the first extended effort to set forth systematically the metaphysics and cosmology of Theosophy. Now, it was partly in response to Sinnett's book that HPB redirected her projected revision of Isis Unveiled into a totally new work, The Secret Doctrine. Sinnett was, therefore, in a very real sense, one of the founders of modern Theosophy because of his questioning and seeking. Certainly, the most important of the continuing founders of both modern Theosophy and the Theosophical Society was Annie Bessent. Before she joined the Society in 1889, she was already well known as a champion of free thought, the rights of oppressed working women, birth control, and social justice. She came into the Society after reading and reviewing The Secret Doctrine, and she became almost immediately H.P. Blavatsky's closest confidant and spiritual successor. On Alcott's death in 1907, Bessent succeeded to the leadership of the Society, as well as of Theosophy. Until her death in 1933, Annie Bessent loomed head and shoulders over every other Theosophist in respect, affection, influence, and accomplishments. Her 44 years of membership saw both Theosophy and the Society assume the basic shape they still have today. She was a powerful influence, a major continuing founder. Bessent's colleague, Charles Webster Leadbeater, must also be counted among the continuing founders. He and Annie Bessent were, in some sense, a replay of the Theosophical Twins, although the relationship between them was quite different from that between Alcott and Blavatsky. Leadbeater was, to a large extent, the primary force in reshaping the presentation of Theosophy in the second generation. His articulation of the ancient wisdom is still that which many present-day Theosophists think of as Theosophy. And Bessent, to a considerable extent, adopted it. Yet Leadbeater was always deferential to Bessent, and she was clearly both the organizational and spiritual leader of the Society until her death. Nevertheless, it was Leadbeater who formulated the way of talking about Theosophy that many of us still use, and in addition, he discovered Krishnamurti. And Krishnamurti became the best known of the many philosophical, spiritual, and esoteric teachers whose roots were in Theosophy and the Society, but who branched out on their own. That, however, is another story. Others also must be counted as continuing founders. George Arundale, C.G. Narajadasa, N. Sri Ram, I.K. Taimni, Radha Bornier, and indeed all of the officers and workers of the Society whose hard work and self-sacrifice, to take up the words of Alcott, have made the Society what it is. We have had and still have continuing founders among us, right down to the present day, right down to us. All who work for the Society and its ideals are, in a sense, its continuing founders, each in his or her own way. Everyone who is engaged with Theosophy and the Theosophical Society is adding to the foundation and preparing for the future. You know, it has been said that if you want to see one of the lords of karma, you know, but the lords of karma are supposed to be great spiritual beings who manage the cause and effect relationships in the universe. And it has been said if you want to see one of the lords of karma, you have only to look into a mirror. Each of us is a lord of karma, our own absolute lawgiver, the dispenser of glory or gloom to ourselves, the decreer of our life, our reward, our punishment, as the third of the three truths of the White Lotus puts it. And similarly, each of us is a founder of the Theosophical Society. The theosophical work you and I do today shapes the society for tomorrow. We are founders of the Theosophical Society. Not in the great historical sense, not in the sense of the major contributions made by Blavatsky, Alcott, Bessent, and others, but in the sense that our actions shape the society. We, you and I, are numbered among its continuing founders. But now let us turn to what we may call the inner founders. All of those I have mentioned so far are the society's outer world founders. The society would not have come into being and could not have continued to function without them. But there are also other inner world founders, without whose impetus the society would never have existed and could not exist today. Colonel Alcott alludes to them also in old diary leaves when he writes, quote, "The Theosophical Society was an evolution, not on the physical plane, a planned creation." Now, the clear implication of that remark is that the society was not actually the result of some chaotic happenstance, but rather on some invisible plane, it was a planned creation. As we look at the society in the world on the physical plane, its history may seem unplanned and chaotic, a bit like that of Topsy, who in Harriet Beecher Stowe's great and influential novel Uncle Tom's Cabin declares, "I 'spect I growed. Don't think nobody never made me." As Alcott says, on the visible plane, the society seems to have just growed. But as Theosophists, we know that the visible plane is only one part of reality and not the most real part. On the inner planes, the society was a planned creation. Not in the details of its operation, certainly, but in the purpose for its being, in its raison d'etre. At that level, it was planned, and those who planned it are its inner founders. They are some of the great spiritual pioneers of our species, whom we call adepts, masters, Mahatmas. One of them, in particular, Madame Blavatsky's own teacher, had directed her to go to America, it seems for the particular purpose of meeting Colonel Alcott and founding the Theosophical Society. HPB herself had earlier tried to form such an organization in Cairo. She called it the Société Spirite, the Spiritualist Society. But HPB was not good at organization, hence the problems with Isis Unveiled. And the aims she had in mind were not at that time right. So that effort ended before it was well started. She seems to have encouraged Alcott to try again on his own, and his proposed effort was a miracle club, which never got started at all. It took both Alcott and Blavatsky working together and with others, and with the inspiration of the great-souled inner teachers, to bring the Theosophical Society into existence. And it takes all of them, as well as us, to keep it in existence. The founders of the society then range from the wisest great souls of our kind through the first pioneering founders, Alcott and Blavatsky, and the successors of those pioneers, down to its present-day membership, us, who are just trying to do our best to carry on in the footsteps of those spiritual giants of yore. We make mistakes, but we recall that the great-souled inner founders ask only that we try. Let us now turn to the purposes of the society that all these kinds of founders have created and are still creating. Even the pioneering outer founders themselves did not get the purposes of the society quite right at first. There was, in the early days, much emphasis on psychic phenomena, because that is what people wanted. The inner founders had to step in and insist on brotherhood as the first object and primary concern of the Theosophical Society, when there was pressure to drift off in other directions. We encourage the study of what religion, philosophy, and science have in common. We investigate the unexplained and the latent. We form links between disciplines and cultures, between West and East. But all of those activities are secondary, are tertiary purposes, not primary ones. It is our responsibility as continuing founders to see that what the inner founders wanted remains the focus of what the society does. And what did the inner founders want? Well, without putting words into their mouths, we can see their intent reflected in the society's three declared objects and also in the three fundamental propositions set forth in the proem to the secret doctrine. In addition to those formal objects and fundamental principles, I would suggest, however, that the Society's purposes can be summed up in three keynote words: cohesion, variety, and choice. These three words denote concepts that are integral to both the three objects and the three fundamental propositions. And I would invite you to consider each of them in turn. First, cohesion. Cohesion is defined in Merriam-Webster's Collegiate Dictionary as the act or state of sticking together tightly, especially unity. The Latin verb from which the word cohesion comes does in fact mean literally to stick together, and more broadly, to be ordered and consistent. Where cohesion exists, there is unity and consistent order. That is, of course, the opposite of chaos. The keynote of cohesion is the essence of the secret doctrine's first fundamental proposition, namely that, quote, there is one absolute reality which antecedes all manifested conditioned being, end quote. In all the cosmos, ultimately, there is only one reality, and everything we see is an expression of it. The keynote of cohesion is also the essence of the first object of the society, to form a nucleus of the universal brotherhood of humanity without distinction of any kind. A nucleus, again according to Merriam-Webster's Collegiate Dictionary, is a central point about which gathering takes place, a core. The first object is simply a practical application of the first fundamental proposition as applied to our species. If everything is one, then we as human beings are also necessarily one. When the Mahachohan, one of the great ones of those wise souls, when he said, the Theosophical Society was chosen as the cornerstone, the foundation of the future religions of humanity, that was surely what he had in mind. The cornerstone of or foundation is not theosophical doctrine. He did not say Theosophy was chosen. He said the Theosophical Society was chosen. So the cornerstone is not doctrine, not teaching, not ideas, but practice. Religion should be that which binds back, as its etymology indicates. Religion is, all of you I'm sure have heard before, from a Latin word meaning to bind back again, religio, re, again or back, and legere, to tie or to bind. So religion should be that which binds back. But too often in the past, religions have served to divide. The future religions of humanity must be true to the meaning of the word religion and bind us back together. The Confucian tradition talks about something which is called the rectification of names. And what that means is that each of us should behave, should act in a manner which is appropriate to the name we apply to ourselves. The things ought to live up to their names. And in this sense, well, for example, we are humans. Therefore, we should act humanely. And it's applied to the society or applied to religions. That means that religions should be things which bind us together and not separate us, as all too frequently today we see them doing. The first object of the society affirms the truth of brotherhood, just as the first fundamental proposition affirms the truth of universal unity. And that is the essence of cohesion. Now, the next key word is variety. Variety is the quality or state of having different forms or types. Multifariousness. Variety is not inconsistent with cohesion. Although the underlying reality is one, its manifestations are multiple and varied. To have cohesion, indeed, we must have variety. A sticking together implies the existence of forms that, without the cohesion of underlying unity, would scatter in chaotic confusion. Upon the surface of our underlying unity, we have great variety of forms. You know, we are told that the DNA of all living things is basically the same. A human being and a banana share most of their genetic structure. A sobering thought. Yet they are exceedingly varied in form. And variety has advantages, both structural and aesthetic. Sex was introduced into the reproduction of living forms because it is evolutionarily advantageous. Unisexual reproduction just replicates the genetic parent of the reproducing entity, the parent. But bisexual reproduction mixes the genes, thus creating variety and furthering evolutionary development. Nature is a wise mother who knows what is good for her children. Variety is not only useful, it is also beautiful. The Jesuit priest Jared Manley Hopkins wrote a poem in praise of variety called Pied Beauty. Glory be to God for dappled things, for skies of couple color as a brindled cow, for rose molds all in stipple upon a trout that swims, fresh fire fall, chestnut falls, finch's wings, landscape plotted and pieced, fold, farrow, and plow, and all trades, their gear and tackle and trim, all things counter, original, spare, strange. Whatever is fickle, freckled, who knows how, with swift, slow, sweet, sour, a dazzle dim, he fathers forth, who is past change, praise him. Variety is the keynote of the second fundamental proposition. which is that eternity is, as the secret doctrine puts it, periodically the playground of numberless universes incessantly manifesting and disappearing, called the manifesting stars and sparks of eternity. That is, the universe of our experience is varied, constantly changing, and we are part of the variety and change. And so is everything pertaining to us. Moreover, that change both advances the universal process and is a source of endless delight. As the theosophical poet William Butler Yeats put it, eternity is in love with the productions of time. The fact of universal and ever-changing variety brings us to the second object of the Theosophical Society. To study and compare religion, philosophy, and science with one another is to understand the three primary modes by which we seek to understand ourselves and the world around us. By science, we seek to know the material side of things. By philosophy, the intellectual side, and by religion, the spiritual side. But those three sides are sides of one manifested reality, the universe and us. Only by understanding how those three sides relate to each other can we understand the order that pervades the cosmos in all its multifariousness. The second object can also be read as calling for the study and comparison of one religion with another, and also one philosophy and one science with another. For there is not one religion, one philosophy, and one science, but many of each. To understand the world and ourselves, we must appreciate the many approaches, religious, philosophical, and scientific, that explain the world and ourselves to ourselves. We cannot and should not try to follow all religions, philosophies, and sciences, but we can appreciate them all. However, appreciation needs discrimination, which is a matter of choice. And that brings us to the third key word, choice. To quote again from Merriam-Webster's Collegiate Dictionary, choice is care in selecting. It is the opportunity to select freely and after consideration. We have a variety of surface experiences in order that we may discover by wise choice how to achieve coherence and with the underlying unity of life. As the third fundamental proposition tells us, quote, "The pivotal doctrine of the Eastern philosophy admits no privileges or special gifts in man, save those won by his own ego through personal effort and merit during a long series of metempsychoses and reincarnations." That personal effort is the exercise of choice, the ability to select freely and after consideration. That is, with discrimination, as the little book at the feet of the Master tells us. We cannot plead with Adam of Genesis that the woman gave me of the tree and I did eat, nor with Eve that the serpent beguiled me and I did eat. To be human is to have the power of choice, and to choose is to create consequences. So in choosing, it behooves us to know as much as possible about what we choose and about the consequences of the choice. As HPB's statement called The Golden Stairs tells us, choice requires an open mind to the variety of possibilities around us. And here we come to the third object of the society, to investigate unexplained laws of nature and the powers latent in humanity. That third object is sometimes understood as being about paranormal phenomena and the occult. That is, about the things which especially interested some of the first members of the society. Its formers, not its founders, to use Colonel Alcott's distinction. But that is, I believe, a misunderstanding of the third object. The third object is really about having an open mind to the possibilities of the world around us, both outside us and inside us. Investigating the unexplained is what all scientists do every day. For the world, at its root, is still unexplained. Indeed, a very excellent TV program, which will be shown, I believe, tomorrow night, called The Elegant Universe, shows that graphically and impressively. Investigating the powers latent in ourselves is what all living and growing persons do every day. For within each of us is a trove of latent powers. Not trivial things like clairvoyance and precognition, but momentous things like compassion and understanding and altruism and confidence. What we choose to investigate is our choice. But remember, by our choices, we define ourselves. We create ourselves. And in so creating ourselves, you and I contribute to the ongoing foundation of the Theosophical Society, of whose nucleus we are a part. One of the great soul teachers cautioned a 14-year-old boy, "All knowledge is useful, and one day you will have all knowledge. But while you have only part, take care that it is the most useful part." Well, to come to my conclusion, we are all continuing founders of the Theosophical Society, but what do continuing founders do? We, as the latter-day continuing founders of the Society, can approach our task of continuing its foundation through the keynotes of coherence, variety, and choice. We can stick together, recognizing what unites us. We can use with joy the pied beauty of the cosmos, recognizing that our diversity is a strength, not a weakness. We can exercise care in selecting, recognizing that the world is full of the unexplained and latent possibilities, and our choice among those possibilities is defining. Beneath the apparent chaos that our senses perceive lies a unified, orderly, and purposeful cosmos. Theosophy is about that cosmos, and the Theosophical Society is about making its unity, order, and purpose more widely known. Aristotle talked about 4 causes of everything. He said everything has 4 causes. For example, the material cause of a chair is the wood out of which it is made. The efficient cause of the chair is the carpenter who makes it. The formal cause of the chair is the pattern according to which the chair is made. And the final cause of the chair is the purpose for which it is made, namely, to be sat upon. The first, and in the Aristotelian sense, the final purpose of the Theosophical Society is to form a nucleus of the universal brotherhood of humanity without distinction of race, creed, sex, caste, or religion. That is the path the inner founders directed us toward. That is the path all of the outer founders have blazed, each in his or her own way. That is the path that all of us who are following them should be treading day by day. That is the only path that will lead to peace and progress in the world. That path is the foundation of the Theosophical Society and the future of humanity. In her final message to Americans, read at one of our conventions in Boston by Annie Bessent, only a few days before Blavatsky's death in 1891, HPB wrote this: After all, every wish and thought I can utter are summed up in this one sentence, the never dormant wish of my heart. Be Theosophists. Work for Theosophy. Theosophy first and Theosophy last. For its practical realization alone can save the Western world from that selfish and unbrotherly feeling that now divides race from race, one nation from the other, from that hatred of class and from social strifes that are the curse and disgrace of so-called Christian peoples. We should keep also in mind the words of the great Rabbi Hillel, who said, "If I am not for myself, who will be for me? But if I am for myself alone, what am I? If not now, when?" As though to answer Hillel, St. Paul wrote in the second epistle to the Corinthians, "Now is the acceptable time." What can you and I, as continuing founders, do? We can follow the words of Hillel and Paul. We can commit ourselves now to cohesion, variety, and choice. We can follow the plan from chaos to order. So let us fare forward, fellow founders. Thank you. I'll be entertained by them, if there are any.
There may be some questions. This was quite a challenging talk. You challenge us when you realize that we are in the footsteps of the founders. Do we have any questions? Did he leave us speechless? I think then that we will have a question here.
Now this is from the webcast. I want you to first know that the first comment that came from the webcast was from São Paulo, Brazil, and it was just congratulations. But the second was a question from Ojai, California. And the question is, give your view of the necessary characteristics of the new Theosophist. And then there was a little praise of yourself as the only potential continuing founder of Theosophy. And then there's a second part. Is there a different emphasis required for the work, capitalized work?
Well, first of all, let me re-emphasize for that lovely person in Ojai what is the central theme of my talk this afternoon, and that is that we are all continuing founders, that everyone has some contribution to make. We will not all make the same contributions, but that's part of the whole need for variety. If only one person could make a contribution, the society would need only one member. That's just like if all wisdom could be put in one book, we would need to publish only one book. That's not the case. We need a variety of competences, we need a variety of approaches, and so we need a variety of members to make these contributions. As for what the characteristics of members. How was the wording of that exactly, Ruth Ann?
The necessary characteristics of the new Theosophist.
The necessary characteristics of the new Theosophist. Again, I don't think you can come up with a single list, because otherwise we would all be the same again. What we need is for people to take what characteristics they have, what are their natural characteristics, their natural abilities, their natural tendencies, and to use them in positive, helpful ways for the society. And that's the same thing I would maintain as using them for the welfare of the world. I don't think the Theosophical Society is not the only organization that works for the welfare of the world, certainly not. But that is its fundamental purpose, basically, its underlying purpose. And we are now at a time in the history of the world when there is enormous division, enormous lack of understanding, enormous feeling of antagonism, enormous clash of values between cultures around the world. And the message of Theosophy is always that every culture, every approach has its own value, its own use. And every culture and every approach has its own weakness and its own vices. And the weaknesses and the vices are normally the shadows of the virtues and strengths, right? And we could take each of the major cultures of the world today and see that each of them has something to say to humanity as a whole, and what they have to say has as a shadow side weaknesses. And what we see in the current conflicts going on are the shadow sides of the participants in these conflicts on both sides coming out. And we have here a clash of the shadow sides. And what the society can do is to call attention to the bright side, to the virtues, to the strengths of these various cultural conflicts, of the elements that enter into the conflicts. And that, I believe, is really the basic calling of the Theosophical Society. The first objective also of our society is often taken as a kind of platitude to form a nucleus of universal brotherhood of humanity. I can remember once Emily Sellon standing here on this platform and saying, "I am so tired of hearing about brotherhood." And what she meant by that was that people talk about it without doing it, right? She was tired of hearing talk and no action. We come to regard that as a platitude. But the way we achieve that is through the other two objects. Those three objects all go together to encourage the study of comparative cultures in all of their aspects will lead to an understanding of what it is that each culture can contribute to world culture. And the society should be leading in that direction. And indeed, then also investigating the unexplained and the latent. The unexplained around us and the latent within us has always been the calling of the society, but the purpose of that is to bring us into knowledge of the world and to knowledge of ourselves so that we can fit into the overall pattern of harmony in what is now conflict between cultures of the world. I hope that satisfies the good person from Ojai.
I'm sure it will.